Jason's the founder of Frontera Strategy and works as a political strategist, an advisor, coalition builder, and his work is focused in public health, education, human services, and foundation and nonprofit issues. He specializes in assisting organizations to develop advocacy strategies to sustain their work. So I knew that a lot of us were looking and trying to finalize our plans about sustainability. And so I was looking for the best speaker possible. We kept talking about different people. And Emmy Marshall at 0 to 3 said, hands down, you've got to ask Jason. So I scheduled a call with Jason, said Emmy Marshall referred me. You know, we talked a bit. He was so energetic. You got to love energetic speakers. And he really, you know, knew his stuff. But even more than that, he and my husband have worked together. And so as we talked, he talked about his work because my husband does advocacy work as well. And so I got a personal recommendation from my husband that Jason is just outstanding. So, Jason, come on up.
I have until 3, okay. I have an hour. All right, so, and I just want to make sure it's which green button am I looking at? The one on top? So, first I am going to do that. Okay, I would be remiss if I didn't do what Lucy just did. And Lucy, thank you for what you did, and thank you for how you started your presentation. The joy of my life, one of the great joys of my life, is that people like Matthew in 0 to 3, where's Matthew? Is he in the room still? Where's Matthew? Matthew, I have to say, I met Matthew for the first time like 10 years ago, and I remember thinking, wow, that guy is so focused and so passionate about infants and toddlers. And here we are, a decade plus later, and absolutely nothing has changed in his focus and his passion. So Matthew, thank you for your consistency and your focus on infants and toddlers, which, as we all know, regardless of how you're looking at it, it's the smartest, it's the science, it's the money, all of it. Now, I want everybody to kind of take a deep breath. This has been a really weird few days. Take a deep breath, look around the room, find someone you do not know, that you have never met. Look them in the eye and say, thank you, you are awesome. So I'm going to do it. So, thank you. Now, is this on? There we are. Now, there we go. Now I can feel like Bono. So, I say that with all and absolute sincerity. This has been, for me personally, almost an out-of-body experience the last few days. And I take great affirmation from the opportunity to come and be with you. So thank you for what you do for all of us. So, how many of you are Twitter people? Raise your hand if you're a Twitter person. Okay, raise your hand if you're going to become a Twitter person after we have our conversation today. And I hope everyone will. So if you're not, become. If you are, you can get a little window about what I actually think about the world. So now, here's what I would like to talk about today. First, a little bit about me. Who are you, and why are you here bothering us in Fort Lauderdale today? How many of you brought family? Anybody, be honest, anybody bring family? How many of you wish you'd brought family with you? How many of you have spouses and kids that will be mad when you go home and tell them where you were? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. Then we'll talk about the reason that we are all here together, the sustainability piece of all this. When we talk about sustainability for the work that you all are doing, that is a fancy word for what? Money, money, money. We're going to be really honest, and we're going to talk about money, because all of the wonderful things that were laid out for us, all of the evidence-based practices that you are implementing, all of the research that's driving this work, all of that costs sustainability, costs money. So we're going to talk about and have an honest conversation about this issue of sustainability. what it means for us as individuals, what it means for our organizations, and for our collaborations. And then we're going to have a conversation, kind of an honest conversation. It might be hard for some people in the room to hear, about philanthropy. How many funders in the room? Any foundations in the room? Raise your hand really, really high. How about you stand up? Stand up. Yeah, stand up. Put both your hands in the air and do a big, but the reality is, we're going to talk about the new grant makers, as I call them, and then we're going to talk about the old grant seekers. And when I say old, I do not mean age, I mean attitude. And unfortunately, many people in this room would probably fall into the category of old grant seekers. Raise your hand if you work for a nonprofit organization, 501c3 nonprofit. Raise your hand if you work for a public entity, public sector. Anything else in the room? Schools, maybe? A few handful of educators. So we're going to talk about how people coming from those different kinds of perspectives can talk to these new grant makers in a language they'll understand. And we'll have 4 specific strategies for dealing with the people that you are going to be asking for money. Now, when we talk about funders, our conversation today is going to be very, very open-ended. Foundations, the public sector, cities, counties, the states, the feds. You have got to be shaking the tree and then finding another tree and another tree and another tree and another tree, and you've got to shake them all as hard as you can. The work that you're being tasked with doing, raising money for critical children's services, I believe, and I go all over the country talking to people in all different kinds of contexts, all different kinds of states, I believe you have a harder row ahead of you now than maybe you've ever had. Because, as we heard, demand is growing, need is growing. Public resources to meet demand and need are dropping, which means that it necessitates an enhanced level of creativity and savvy and innovation and different thinking about how you are going about producing the resources that you need to be sustainable, okay? Now, what I'd like to start off with a little bit, though, is who am I and how did I get here, other than on an airplane? Now, this is what I do during the day. One of these 3 pictures is reality, and the other 2 are kind of made up. I'll let you pick which one's the reality. Now, so as I said, I spend a lot of time at the Texas Capitol. I'm a registered lobbyist. I work only for nonprofit organizations, work with a lot of foundations who are interested in policy stuff. So when I look at this is where a lot of you all find yourselves, right? You're the ones who are in the middle of it. There's always fighting, there's always arguing, and you're trying to put yourself in a position of compromise, get everybody around the table together. Like just this picture right here on the top right, you see the guy with the bald spot? The other guy with the bald spot? Right here, that one. You see that there, and the guy on the right there? The guy on the right just told the guy with the bald spot that he was going to shoot him in the head. That's the floor of the Texas House of Representatives. So when you think about the context, in which you're working, understand that when you're dealing with public sectors, employees, when you're dealing with anything politically related, you don't really have a lot of control. As many of us would probably argue is pretty obvious right now. You're in many ways cast adrift in this sea. And the question that you all have to ask yourselves is if this is the reality that's determining our public policy, because it is, how do you navigate within that reality? And how do you, as publicly funded entities, public-private partnerships, collaboratives, how do you all talk about and think about sustainability? I know that the very first time you guys met, you talked about sustainability. The very first time. Every time you've gotten together, you've talked about how do we keep funding this thing? Some organizations I've seen over the years and all different kinds of children's issues. You have to ask yourself, and when you're in a moment like many of you are, of transition, where you're moving from one funding stream, hopefully, to one or more other funding streams, you have to ask yourself are you more able to do that at the outset or at the end? And I would argue, if you're not planning for sustainability at the outset, you're going to have a really, really hard time at the end. or a harder than you have to time at the end. So some of you are thinking, whew, glad I did that. And some of you are thinking, who invited this guy? He's making me feel bad. He's making me feel anxious. Well, we should all feel anxious, regardless of where you started this journey of planning for the transition. But the reality is, so many of us find ourselves in that caboose. We do not have the capacity to create a long-term funding plan because we don't have the certainty necessary to do so. We have funders who won't give us multi-year grants. We have public sector entities that won't continue the funding based upon the politics of the moment. It is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do to plan for longevity when you're simply trying to keep the locomotive's engine running, which is what you guys are doing. So all too often, we find ourselves as either program providers or advocates or people of conscience who are concerned about what's happening in our country. We find ourselves in the caboose, right? Where we are not driving the train, we're being pulled along behind the train. How many of you live near a railroad track? Anybody? When was the last time you saw a caboose? I bet there are people in this room who have never seen a caboose on a railroad track because they're too young, because they've been replaced with those little boxes. Caboose used to be where the engineer would sleep and where you had the brake pressure thing to determine whether or not your brakes were going to work. Now, if you look at the end of a train, there's that little metal, there's this little box about that big. That's the caboose, because it monitors all that stuff electronically. There are no more cabooses. So if you want to be sustainable, you have got to think like a locomotive and plan at the outset, because the cabooses are extinct, okay? And when you think about that image, remind yourselves that if you're not thinking strategically and opening your mind about who your funding partners might be, not just your collaborative programmatic partners, you will forever be in the caboose, right? Have you guys ever seen the Marx Brothers movie Go West? Anybody? It's like, okay, that one died. We'll leave that one. Because there's a great caboose scene if you haven't. Now, I lost my clicker, as I always do in these presentations. So, seriously, I lost my clicker. Can you advance it for me, man, back there, before I find my clicker? Now, as I have worked at the legislature in Texas, and I've worked with organizations working with children across the country, we encounter a tremendous disconnect when we are working to raise money for children's programs. We hear from foundations, from other organizations, the people who have money, public sector providers, whomever it might be, cities, counties. We often hear, if those people, and I've heard this, I've had so many foundation trustees tell me this, because in Texas and across the country where I've worked the last few years, there has been a pronounced disconnect. People like you want resources to do good work. Foundations have money, cities, counties sometimes have money, states sometimes have money to help you do good work. You're doing good evidence-based work. They want to support good evidence-based work, right? Where's the breakdown? Where is the breakdown? We are having two parallel conversations. The funders are having one conversation, and the people wanting their funding are having a distinctly different conversation. Can you always control what foundations' priorities are? No. Foundation staff can't always control what their priorities are, because the man or the woman who died however many years ago and created that foundation told them what that foundation was going to focus on, donor intent, okay? So when you think about this, I urge all of you to think every interaction that you have. I was sitting here watching this conversation earlier about the importance of language, the importance of, imagine you've got a Safe Baby Court team approach to your fundraising. You don't assume that everyone is going to work in a silo and wants to work in a silo. You work under the assumption, just like you do in your own work, the modeling that you do for those parents is the modeling that you should do for philanthropists. Working together lets all of us go farther, right? One of the most interesting things that I'm working on right now is an effort to go around the country and get foundations to work together on these kinds of issues. It is against, ultimately, often their internal DNA to do so, right? Because we're all right? We're right. I'm the smartest guy in the room, and so is everybody else, right? But the reality is that foundations often want your help, and we don't approach it that way. We go to the foundation rattling a tin cup, thinking, you've got the silver, put it in our cup. The reality is that's the wrong approach. That approach puts them in a power dynamic that they don't deserve and have not earned. You deserve to have the power in the conversation, not the people who simply have access to somebody's grandpa's money, right? So what I'm urging everyone to do is rethink those relationships you have with your funders and put yourselves in the context of a level playing field, okay? Now, let's talk specifically and strategically how we can level that playing field, because there are some very specific things that you can do, but you gotta understand who you're dealing with. You gotta understand where philanthropy, particularly private sector foundations, find themselves right now. And they are all about system change. What we have right now are foundations who are increasingly frustrated by the fact that government is absolving itself of responsibility for the very basics of our society. So many foundations will look at the work that you all are doing and say, okay, I get it, but why isn't the public sector paying for this? You are hearing that question more and more and more every year, because why? The public sector is doing what? Less and less and less funding of the things that you guys care about and are doing than they were the previous year. So foundations are increasingly finding themselves put into a box. Did you start a private foundation because you wanted to absolve government of its basic responsibilities? No. You started a private foundation because you wanted to support creative people who were doing interesting projects that were essentially research and development that could be replicable across a broad system. Who's doing work like that in this room, I wonder, right? It's all about how you talk about the work that you do. If you're assuming that foundations are going to fund you, I call it the cardiac assessment. Their heart tells them that you're doing good work. They did the cardiac assessment. That don't work. The advantage that you all have that most children's programs do not have, home visiting being a potential exception to all of this, is you've got the data. You've got the numbers, you've got the research. And it's incredibly compelling, as we just saw. The presentation that was just given about the data, the outcomes, the returns, should form the foundation of the first conversation you have with every foundation program officer when you go home. That's where you start it. Outcomes matter, systems change matter. Have I got an idea for you? We've got good results that can provide a demonstration that the public sector could replicate with their own money, because we know that private foundation, you don't have it. You are research and development for them, okay, for private sector money. Don't forget that. Additionally, more and more of your foundation boards know exactly what they want, because they have been a passive recipient of grants for years. And what we have seen in the last 10 years, the last decade I've been doing this, is a dramatic shift in how foundations themselves are approaching things like programmatic systems change work like that which you are doing. The shift and the change has been they are no longer passively waiting for proposals to come in the door. They have the expectation that people are going to come to them, find out what they want, find out what they care about, and not give them proposals that are based upon what you want. They don't care what you want at a foundation board meeting. What they care about is whether or not the proposal in front of them is in alignment with the donor's intent and the strategic direction that that foundation has set for itself. They don't really care about much else. They care about you as people more than they care about you as organizations. Foundations don't just fund organizations, they fund the individual people within those organizations. It's a lie to think otherwise, right? Now, how many of you are working with family foundations or have ever worked with a family foundation? Find the grandchildren. We'll talk about this in a minute. The grandchildren are sick and tired of mom and granny and gramps using the family's fortune to put Band-Aids on the same things that great-grandma and great-grandpa were putting the foundation's money into. There is a cultural shift happening in foundations right now, and I urge all of you, when we get to this, when you begin your philanthropic outreach, which we'll talk about in a minute, that you find the young family members. They are your friends. They're the ones who are the most inclined to be focused on system change. They're the ones who are to be most inclined on thinking differently and creatively about how to do this kind of work, how to get the sustainability you desperately want. How many of you have a community foundation or a hospital conversion foundation in your community? How many of you even know what a community foundation is? Because I didn't for a long time. A community foundation, imagine this way. A private foundation is when one really, really, really rich man or woman takes all of their money and puts it into a big pile that the federal government requires that they give 5% of away every year, okay? Private foundation. A community foundation is a collection of not really, really, really rich people, but really, really rich people who get their money together in aggregate. So if you go to a community foundation, you're not talking to one donor with one donor's interests. You're talking potentially to hundreds of donors with hundreds of different interests. We ignore the potential of community foundations at our peril, okay? Those of you who do advocacy work related to this, community foundations can also give you a grant to lobby. Private foundations can give you lobby money too. They just cannot earmark it specifically like a community foundation can. A hospital conversion foundation. Anybody ever heard of a hospital conversion foundation? What is happening across the country, and this is very, very relevant to all of you in this room, given the work that you do is related so clearly to children's health, children's mental health. Many church hospital systems, nonprofit hospital systems, are being bought by for-profit corporations. My wife used to be the program manager at a foundation in Austin that had about a $5 million endowment. They were giving away about $5 million a year. Next year, they're going to be giving away more than $100 million in a 7-county area. They literally don't know how to give the money away. Where are my Texas peeps? Where are my Texas peeps? Yeah, we'll talk later. But the reality in all of this is that these hospital conversion foundations have more money than they literally know what to do with. They are in your states. You were going to find them. You were going to politely stalk them. Now, let's talk about the old grant seekers. This is you. I don't care if you're 22 and you just got out of college and this is your first job, or if you've been doing this for a long time. We're old grant seekers. We are. We think about the work that we do from a very old school frame of mind. We think of ourselves as quiet and demure, and we sit and we will go politely to talk to our foundations and beg them for some money, right? No. What we are going to do is actually go find out what our foundation partners actually want, and we'll talk about how to do that. Next. We have always used the same money. Same foundation has been funding us since the dawn of time. They know the proposal's coming. It's pretty much a line item in their budget every year, so we never have to think about it. We never have to worry about it. And as a result, you now have one funder, and that funder may change their mind, and you have no diversification, and you will tank as a result. Sustainability is about information. Sustainability is also about diversification, okay? Sustainability is also about opportunism. If your organization is not able and willing to move quickly on opportunities, you might miss them, and we'll talk about that. And finally, old grant seekers do not maximize the potential benefit of third-party verifiers. What I mean there is, when I go to the legislature, it's the exact same principle. If I'm talking about a children's issue, the last person I want talking about a children's issue is a child advocate, because they're always talking about children's issues. What I want is someone from the criminal justice system. What I want is a doctor. What I want is who you guys already have in your Safe Baby Core teams. You guys have a cast of unusual suspect characters. When was the last time a judge walked into a foundation office with a doctor? That's never happened in any foundation you would ever apply to. That has happened in the past a total of 0 times. 0. If you want to get things done, if you want to have a different conversation, stop using the same people, have the same conversation you've been having for 20 years. Because obviously it ain't working in some cases, okay? It's not about that we were doing it wrong. It's about that we have to change with changing times to do it differently, okay? So what I want to do now is deep down dig into those 4 little things. Now, how many of you, this is it, so think like a grant maker, like a new grant seeker. Think like a new grant seeker, not an old grant seeker. Number 1, information, diversification, opportunism, third-party verification. That's it. And let's peel the onion back a little bit on each of those. Now, how many of you have a development director in your organization? Or somebody raises money for you if you don't have a development? Somebody in your organization is tasked with finding the money, I hope? That would be sustainability advice number 1, is put this in someone's job description. Okay? Number 1. So what we often do is, if you've ever looked for a nonprofit job, what nonprofit jobs are always available? Always. Director of development. Who said it? Say it loud, say it proud. Director of development. Why? Because it's a horrible job, that's why. It's a horrible job. It's almost as bad as being a lobbyist at the Texas Capitol. Because I've been doing it for almost 20 years. I have had people look me in the face and say no to me tens of thousands of times at this point. I so don't take it personally. At this point, I probably have a look of shock and surprise when they say yes. So the reality is, our development directors are like those lobbyists and those legislators who are just always getting beaten down and told, no, it's such a hard, hard job. And why is it so hard? It's like a horror movie, what we're asking them to do. We ask them, okay, our funding's gonna run out in September, and you've been on staff here, I don't know, 3 weeks. So where's our development sustainability plan? Because we're running out of money in 2 months, good luck. And don't quit in 3 months, please. Because it took us 6 months to find you, for God's sake. Now, why would they do anything differently? Why would they be successful if we've positioned them for failure? If we have positioned them to walk into a dark room. And I always tell people, if you have somebody who is raising money and they're walking into a dark room, they are guaranteed to fail. 9 times out of 10, organizations like yours who want money from foundations are like, all right, we got this. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's make a list of every foundation in Texas, in our town, and we'll figure out how many of them might give us money and how many of them will never give us money. Okay, so you're doing that assessment. And then you're at, okay, these are the 5 foundations we're going to submit proposals to. So you write those proposals, you pour your heart and your soul into it, and then you send them off to those foundations, and then you get that thin letter of rejection back. And you're like, why did we spend all of that time? They don't even fund what we care about. How many of you, without a request for money attached, raise your hand, be honest, have ever gone to a funder of any kind, public or private, and said, you know what, before we ask you for money, will you tell us what your mission is, what your strategic plan is, and what you're interested in your board, your family, the family members on your board in particular, are most interested in funding? How many of you have ever done that? Ever? Why? Because we're scared, we're demure, they're busy, we don't want to bother them because they're foundations and they have all the money and we have to act like, 4-year-olds and, be real nice and maybe they'll fund us, maybe if we're nice. We ask ourselves, our organizations, the people we ask to raise money to pay your salaries, to walk into a dark room. Don't do that. It is sustainability malpractice. What I urge all of you to do is to go talk to them. They love it. How many of you are friends with program officers at foundations? Ask them. If you ask any foundation program officer the hardest part of their job, it will be finding good quality proposals that are in line with our donor intent, in line with our strategic plan, and will actually be fundable by our board because they're something that we've shown to care about. If you have never read the annual report of every foundation in your community, do it when you get home. Step 1. Step 2, figure out the program officers in those individual grant-making institutions. Your job, you are their best friend. I am a lobbyist. Why am I good at getting money from foundations? I treat the foundation program officer like a legislator because I understand that legislator and I have a symbiotic relationship. What I do, if you help me, I don't make campaign contributions. I'm not that kind of lobbyist. But if you help me this session, Chairman Huberty, pass a bill to make the children of every first responder who's killed in the line of duty eligible for free pre-K, got that done in May, wouldn't you want to have the press know about that? Sure you would. Program officers, their job is to make them look good, right? If you're program officer, if you tell the program officer, hey, I want to come talk to you. I want to find out what you guys care about because I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste my time. You know what that program officer is going to say? When can you come? Hallelujah. Thank you. Because I got too much on my plate to deal with people that I'm not, organizationally allowed to fund. If you are not reaching out, you are at the bottom of the pile. If you're reaching out and being proactive, you move to the top. Your proposal moves to the top of the pile because it is not a shot in the dark. You're not going into that dark room with a quiver of arrows and just shooting them randomly. You're going in and you're saying, we know you care about X, we know you care about Y, here's what we do, where's our overlap? How do we work together, okay? They will love you if you do this. And the simple best referral from a foundation, the simple best referral to fund you that a foundation can get is from another program officer at a different foundation. So you go in and you talk to these program officers and say, oh, it sounds like your foundation, it sounds like, you guys may not have the resources necessary or it may not be, this isn't your cup of tea. That's cool. You guys you fund important work elsewhere. Keep on funding the Domestic Violence Center. That's great. We really appreciate that. It's part of our work too. But more specifically to us, who would you recommend that we talk to? Let them be your grassroots network of connectivity. How many of you have ever asked a foundation or other funder to do that? They want to help you, especially if you've got good outcomes and are doing good work. And I know what I'm asking you is to be open and flexible. And I tell you, a lot of people in your position have gotten mad at me in Texas because I tell all the Texas foundations to don't think of this as, and the foundations don't get this because foundations are in the mindset of, I sit at my desk and I review the proposals as they come in the door. I don't go out and solicit proposals 9 times out of 10. So they're sitting there passively receiving requests for money that often come with no attached relationship. That ain't gonna work. This is your opportunity. Do it now. This is your first step in this process to move the caboose toward the front of the train. Now, find new sources of revenue. Anybody know what that graphic represents? If you guys live in Texas, you might. So this is fracking. Ever heard fracking? The reason fracking works is you got to a place like West Texas, there were always spent oil wells. And then some guy, George Mitchell Foundation, ironically, decided that if you started going horizontally, you could get a lot more stuff. So you mix a bunch of chemicals with a bunch of sand, pump it down in there, it breaks the rock up, and previously, all of a sudden, an oil field that wasn't supposed to give any oil anymore starts pumping natural gas like you wouldn't believe and polluting the groundwater and, making Texas rich, but that's a different story. But the size to say is you had all these oil men and women out in the oil patch all over the United States who thought, oh, well, we're done. We can't possibly get any new revenue out of these oil wells. You guys got to be wildcatters. You know what a wildcat is? Wildcatter? Somebody goes out and starts drilling speculative oil wells. That's who you are. If you're thinking that you do not have to cast a broader net and look for new and different money and get really darn creative about how you do this, you ain't going to be sustainable. So you have got to find or help create new opportunities for funding. In Texas not too long ago, people were concerned about children's health insurance. So they thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we created a tax on strip clubs and strip club admissions? And it was known as the poll tax or the tassel tax, but it passed. So every strip club admission results in $5 going into the state treasury for children's health. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, around home visiting, Texas passed a bill that created a voluntary checkoff on every birth certificate, death certificate, and my favorite, divorce decree, to allow people to make a voluntary $5 contribution to home visiting services. You could do that in your counties. You could do that at the county level. Create a checkbox. Why not? I mean, every time somebody's coming through court cases, offer them the voluntary opportunity to make a $10 contribution to Safe Baby Court Teams. You could do that. And automatically, look at how Arizona funds a lot of their work. Cigarette tax, declining revenue source, keep them smoking, but still, there are creative outlets here. And in thinking about this, there are, if you're assuming that the old ways of going about doing this and raising money are going to work, you're going to miss real opportunities to think differently and think creatively about how you bring in new money. Do not forget these community foundations. The second piece of homework I ask all of you to do after you go talk to those private foundations, odds are, if your town has a community foundation or your region has a community foundation, it will be regionally specific. These community foundations talk to one another, right? So if you're operating in multiple different communities, the community foundations will be talking to one another. What I would offer you the suggestion of doing is go talk to your community foundation. Do not ask, does your community foundation have an interest in Safe Baby Court Teams? That's the wrong question. The question you will ask your community foundation partners is, not if, but which of your donors, because it's like a United Way, except everybody gets to give their money away individually, which of your donors might be interested in the kind of collaborative work that we're doing here? And so instead of having one person to tap, you could conceivably have multiple people to tap. That's the beauty of a community foundation. We, in the programmatic advocacy children's domain, do a terrible job with community foundations. I believe that in many ways they're the single best potential source of money for programs like the ones you guys are running, if we can just go talk to them. Also, look at the public sector. How many of you are currently receiving public funding other than the public funding from the feds, which you all receive, right? How many of you get state money? Anybody get state money? Anybody get county money? Anybody get city money? School district money? So raise your hand if you got city or county money. City or county money. How did you do it, if I can ask? Through relationships with elected officials, or? And do you have a line item that now recurs in that county budget? No. Not yet. Not yet. So there you go. It is doable. And this gets to the point of diversification. So many of us are relying upon one sector funding stream. Those public dollars are going to save us. Or, oh, this one foundation benefactor will be the key to keeping us afloat. It does not work like that. Unfortunately, it just does not. Now, when you think about all of this, I'm going to put in a last plug. When you are in those foundation meetings, those initial meetings, you are going to ask specifically about hospital conversion foundations. Many children's programs, early childhood education, are not eligible for grants from those entities. Every single Safe Baby Court team is eligible for funding from a hospital conversion foundation because you work on substance abuse, because you work on mental health, because you work on dental care, because you work on physical health. Those are issues that are near and dear, and more importantly, those are issues that these foundations are legally required to invest dollars into, okay? So all of that to say that these are the folks who are not only maybe predisposed to give you money, but are legally obligated to give money to somebody like yourselves and have a hard time finding people that can bring in the kind of data and outcomes that you all can. Now, I would urge all of us to finally think that if we look at the spreadsheet, because everybody's got, it's the magic of fund accounting, right? All of these different columns in the spreadsheet that fund all of the different attributes of your work. The more columns of funders you have, the more sustainable your work is. The more eggs you put in that one basket, the easier it is for the bottom to fall out of the basket. Diversification isn't important just for the money. It's important to show that you have broad support. And the last point I want to make here is about corporate foundations. We don't often think of them, but the work that you all do, you know, as Matthew noted, is bipartisan. It's non-controversial. Everyone in this country is coming to a slow realization that we have an opioid crisis. If you look at what happened in the Pennsylvania legislature this year, the Pennsylvania legislature, not one to write big checks all the time, increased funding for home visiting services by $5 million a year because of the opioid crisis specifically. So funders are moving in this direction. Foundations are getting inundated with requests from mental health, substance abuse, behavioral health inclined organizations. Not every one of those organizations can come with a viable solution. People right now in foundations of all types are looking for a response to the opioid epidemic. You guys are not a silver bullet, but based upon what I saw this morning, I don't know who's doing better work on this topic, if anybody, than you guys. Hold that up. Go to if you need an excuse to have a conversation, here it is. Here's another excuse to have a conversation that I hope we won't have too visceral a reaction to. Use the moment. Use the moment. The moment gives us all pause, as well it should. The moment gives me the heebie-jeebies, as it should. But that doesn't mean that we can't be crass opportunists. And I am working under the assumption that is not his tax form in his right hand. So now, how do you use the moment without looking like a crass opportunist? I honestly believe after the election, I talked to a lot of people, and the general consensus I got was the sky is falling. And my response to that in November and in January was the sky is not falling. I don't know if I would have said that with such confidence this morning, but the sky is not falling, but it's very bad. And I think that there is not, remember, at the outset, what are the new grant makers concerned about with regards to their relationship with government? Government is absolving itself of responsibility for the most basic needs of the people of this country, particularly its children. We as a society, we as a people, and I'm saying we because it's a representative democracy. We can't wash our hands of this. We own it too. We have washed our hands of our children. particularly our low-income kids, particularly our Latinx kids, particularly our black kids, and our Native American kids. We just know it. And the reality is, cuts are coming. It's not hyperbole, it's not exaggeration, it's not being Chicken Little. If you were to walk into your foundations, your funders, your cities, your counties, and say, look at the numbers. Look what we're doing. Look how effective this is. I don't need to tell you how much money we're going to save as a result of this. We're just so worried because we know there's more competition for your dollars. And we're trying to figure out how to tell you our outcomes-based story in a way that will allow it to rise above the growing clamor. Foundations are slammed. They're getting more requests for less money than ever before. And one of the reasons, very clearly, I don't need to tell you guys this, is right there. There are going to be massive cuts. If they do any kind of tax reform, there will be cuts. Not just at the federal level, but at the state level. A place like Texas, where 85% of our state budget goes to health and human services. That is overwhelmingly, more than other states, federal money, 52%. What happens in Washington happens in Texas and happens in our communities, and it's the same for you. That is not fear-mongering. That's reality. And if you go to your foundations and you lay out the truth about what is happening, and you're honest, and you say, we do not know what the future holds, but we do know that we need to diversify and we need to do things differently, they will listen. To his credit, he has opened a door. I personally think, maybe he's opened up a bigger door that a lot of us wished had gotten kicked open a long time ago. We'll see. We'll see if our better angels are there or not. But all of this to say, you can go and ask these foundations. The climate of fundraising for all nonprofits and people of conscience has changed. We know that you're getting more proposals because we all know the government's doing less. How do we help you navigate and figure this out? Because we've got a diverse array of people here. Now, that diverse array of people that you have, I couldn't decide to do Beatles or Friends, so I did a little bit of both. The crowd of people that you all have, do you have judges involved in what you do? Yes or no? Do you have police officers involved in what you do? District attorneys involved in what you do? Medical professionals involved in what you do? Educators involved in what you do? Who else that I'm not mentioning? Funders. You have other foundations involved. Who else? Businesses. Business people involved? Anywhere? Public health. Public health providers involved. Yeah. Okay. This is the worst, this is the hardest thing that I always tell people, and I'm going to, sorry, not sorry. Don't talk. Don't talk. Don't talk. The more you talk, the worse you're doing. When you're meeting with a funder, I always tell people same thing when you're meeting with a legislator. Anyone who gets a paycheck as a result of the conversation that you're having, which is, raise your hand if you're going to get a paycheck as a result of the conversation that we're having. Be honest. Be honest, everybody. Okay. If you're going to continue, rephrase, if you're going to continue to do this incredible work that you're hoping to keep doing, the people that you have around that table are your messengers. Have that judge go to that foundation meeting. You introduce yourself, you introduce the project, you introduce Safe Baby Courts teams, and you say, you know what? I'm going to shut up because the judge here, she knows the story so much better than I do. And Dr. Jones, I'm going to let the two of them fill this in because, you know what? I'm just going to sit here silently. That's how you speak the loudest in those meetings. If it's about you and your organization and your needs, it's on some level suspect. If you have an independent third-party verifier coming in and saying, we have lower court costs, we have fewer unnecessary medical referrals, We have fewer kids coming into our ERs with abuse and neglect. We have placements that are happening, and then we have permanency occurring. We have kids who are coming out of the system months faster. It's not enough anymore to do the right thing. You have to do the economically smart thing. You guys can make the case that you're doing both, but you are not the best messengers of that case. What I'm hoping will happen after you have these foundation meetings with your partners is you will leave, and the foundation trustees will look at each other, and the program officers will look at each other and say, I've never had a judge come ask for a grant before, let alone a judge with a doctor and this CPS child welfare official. This is incredible. And then you know what you're going to do in those meetings with foundations? You're going to say, you know, just like we're modeling collaboration amongst ourselves here, how about, you know, is there any way that we could create maybe a philanthropic consortium of sorts where a bunch of foundations get together and do this together? Foundations don't like to be the first dollar in. They don't like to be the only dollar in. There is safety in numbers. And we've been doing this around the country, pulling foundations together around policy and advocacy work. And once you get them together, they give more because they're not doing it alone. There's a little bit of peer pressure and, you know, one-upsmanship, but also there's security and safety. So, in conclusion, because if I'm correct, I'm running out of 5 minutes, what I would love to kind of, you know, finalize, you know, before we open up for a couple minutes of questions is internalize this. It is possible, even if you feel like you're sitting in the caboose, it's not too late to turn the caboose into a locomotive. It's not. The question becomes, are you going to think differently and approach grant makers and funders with new words, with new people, and with a different attitude? And I urge all of you to take a leap of faith and pick up the phone and call people that you have formerly felt like you had to kind of, you know, kowtow to and bow down to. I urge all of you to find those people and build those relationships right now. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm going to be around for a while afterwards if people want to talk, kind of specifically about what this could look like for your organizations. So, time for a couple questions, or I know people might be anxious because we've been here for a while. Any questions? Great. What was that? What did he just say?
Jason actually has a breakout session that will be in this room if some of you want to really dig into some of the details. Thank you very much, very much.